In today's video, we have the news that the Vancouver Canucks and the Ottawa Senators have discussed swapping defensemen. Should that be something they reconsider or re-examine? We'll discuss that possibility. Plus, Frank Seravalli is reporting that the Winnipeg Jets and Toronto Maple Leafs could make excellent trade partners. How could that deal go down? We'll discuss that. Plus, Bo Horvat's future in Vancouver looks like he's likely going to be moved at some point. We're going to discuss another team that's reportedly makes sense to be in the mix here. Plus, we have a waiver claim and a big injury update in Winnipeg and some other news as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today. First up, we have news on the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, we had Jost from Minnesota placed on waivers, and he has been claimed. He's been picked up now by the Buffalo Sabres. So obviously, this is going to be his third team. Two teams have essentially given up on the former first-round pick. He's kind of trending in that bust category right now. Jost has not really ever materialized. He was drafted with a lot of potential, and it's had a really tough time kind of realizing that on a consistent basis. Of course, he was drafted by the Avalanche, and last year, in a bit of a surprise move, in a sense, he was traded to Minnesota for Nico Sturm later in the season. Of course, now he's gone from Minnesota. Sturm also left the Avalanche as a free agent this past offseason as well. So we'll see if he gets much of an opportunity in Buffalo and if he can finally start to realize his potential that he once showed back in his junior days. As a result of that, the Buffalo Sabres had demoted forward Anders Bjork down to the American Hockey League to make room on the roster for Jost. And of course, where he's gone from Minnesota, they've now recalled Nick Petan to take his spot on the NHL roster here as well. Now, as I mentioned, some pretty significant news out of Winnipeg today. Obviously, Nikolai Ehlers has been out of the lineup already, and we have a little bit further clarification on what's going on with him. He's going to be having sports hernia surgery sometime early next week, and is going to be out for a period of time. Now, at this point, no timetable has been given by the team. We probably won't have a better indication on that until after the surgery is completed. But typically, these types of injuries that require surgery for sports hernias usually average anywhere from a minimum of 6 weeks. That's usually the shortest you see players return, but sometimes it can be as long as 12 weeks. So you're looking at anywhere from like a month and a half, possibly as long as 3 months. So the Jets have had a real good start to this NHL season. Obviously, they prefer to get him back in their lineup sooner than later. He's a real important player for them. A big piece of the forward group, good speed, good goal scorer, and drives a lot of the offense there. So they're certainly missing Ehlers, but so far, they've been managing here without him. I know there's been some talk wondering if they might consider making a trade to try to find some extra depth for that forward group to kind of keep things going, but I think they'll kind of take their chances for the short term, that they have the answers internally and see where it goes. Plus, it's not like Ehlers is going to be out for the entire season, so it's not like they can LTIR his contract if they need to be able to spend over the cap. So I wouldn't be completely shocked if they maybe make a minor move to add an extra player, but nothing that's going to cost them a whole lot of money. But Ehlers is going to be out for a while, and that's certainly going to hurt the Jets. Now, one team that's been mentioned in the trade rumor mill numerous times here, really, if you date back even to the summertime, back as far as July, August, it's been reported that the Calgary Flames were interested in adding another forward, ideally somebody who could play top nine, and even maybe a versatile player that could kind of go up and down your lineup. That might be the type of player you could put in a couple of different spots depending on how things are going on any given night. Of course, gives Daryl Sutter some depth and some flexibility. But right now, they seem to have found their answer internally, at least in the short term. We've seen Adam Ruzicka get a chance, an opportunity to play on the top line recently, and he's been contributing. He's getting some goals and some points, looking good up there. So I know, like, with all the talk around the Flames and maybe making this addition, I think they're going to likely hold off and see how this goes. Now, Ruzicka may or may not be a long-term option. Sometimes you see players benefit from playing with other stronger players, and they see a small, like a short-term bump, and it doesn't always sustain itself. So they'll probably ride this out here on a short-term basis, and so we'll see where it goes. But if it continues to work, that'll probably, likely reduce the chances quite a bit that we see the Calgary Flames make a move. But of course, if they can get themselves back into a better playoff position here, of course, Calgary Expected to do good things this season, and so far they haven't had a great start that they were hoping for. So difficult to say where things move, but I can see them maybe if they're in the playoff picture like they're hoping to be, that maybe they add some more depth at the deadline. But I don't see them making a quick jump here to get that done anytime soon, as long as Ruzicka continues to play well. Now, Elliot Friedman's also reporting tonight that the Vancouver Canucks and the Ottawa Senators have discussed a trade, and it's a trade of defensemen, and it's obviously a very interesting one. I wouldn't call it a blockbuster deal, but certainly fairly significant. That could have an impact on both teams, depending on how things go. I guess you could call it a swap of unfavorable contracts and players that could probably benefit from a fresh start, but it's honestly very much debatable if these players will really be able to get themselves back on track on a new market, new team or not. But it's believed that they've been talking about trading Tyler Myers for Nikita Zaitsev. Now, we know at one point that the Ottawa Senators and Vancouver Canucks and Montreal Canadiens, who all kind of played each other there over a short, few days span, as the Canucks were traveling east especially, that ended up in a situation where the Senators appeared to be watching the Canucks quite closely. There seemed to be lots of scouting going on, and we've heard a couple of different names that might have been discussed, but this one sounds a little bit more concrete, that it was more likely what was going on. We had some reports that the Sens were talking to Vancouver about a defenseman. There were some people that were convinced that it was Oliver Ekman-Larsson, which I really don't see being a good fit in Ottawa and makes sense contractually or just stylistically. But, Myers for Zaitsev, you might be able to argue might make sense. I just don't know, to be honest, that either player is going to be a whole lot better than what they've been in the last couple of seasons on any other team. Now, the problem here is that both players have a modified no-trade clause, and they both have 10 teams they can block in a deal. And obviously, one of these players has done that. That's the belief from Friedman, that it wasn't a case of the teams not wanting to pull the trigger. It was a case of one of the players, and I believe that it's believed to possibly be Zaitsev, that blocked the deal to go to Vancouver. And that's why this deal has never happened. Now, both players have this year and one additional year left on their contract. The AAV for Myers is a little bit higher than Zaitsev, so I would assume that perhaps Vancouver was going to retain a little bit, maybe to even things out. I'm not really sure what the plan was going to be in that sense, but I would suspect that was possibly part of the discussion here, but this trade is not materialized. So do you think that's something that Vancouver and Ottawa should reconsider? I know Sens fans have been anxious to get Zaitsev off the roster and move him off to another team. Certainly he's been demoted recently to the American Hockey League. I'm not sure exactly if he's going to suit up to games or if that's more of a paper transaction. Like a prime example, we've seen a veteran like Wayne Simmons in Toronto move up and down between the American Hockey League and the NHL roster in the last few weeks, but he has not reported or been asked to go for the American Hockey League and actually play. So he's basically been training and practicing with the Maple Leafs at the NHL level. And if he's not on that roster, obviously he can't get into any kind of game action, but that's just the way it's been. So I'm not sure exactly what their plan is in that sense, but certainly an interesting deal. I don't really know that was a great idea from either side. Like I said, I know each player has had his struggles. I know each fan base, each team would probably like to make a deal in that sense, but I just don't know that it really fits and benefits. I know Vancouver, and listening to Rutherford and Alvin talk, they really want some salary cap flexibility. I don't see Pierre Dorian pulling the trigger on a deal in that sense without having money retained a bit on Myers' contract to even things out from a financial perspective. So I don't know. I personally don't know that they really should revisit this. They might. I know obviously things have gone a bit sideways for each of these teams, and they're looking for some improvements and probably a minor shakeup to get things going. But I don't know that this is really going to materialize any further. But interesting that we finally get more further clarification on what exactly they were discussing. Now, the future on Bo Horvat seems to be very likely at this point, but until it's done, it's not done. So they say, but his future in Vancouver is very much in question. Of course, the JT Miller contract combined with a lot of other factors here, the slow start, the bad results, leads to the fact that Horvat is very likely to be traded. Now, of course, that's not a full-time guarantee. They may surprise us here and sign a player, but I just don't know that it's possible for them to give us 2 surprise signings here in a short span. To add another contract, that's going to probably be as much or more than JT Miller after the season that Horvat is starting to have here. We've heard about Columbus being a good fit. Of course, like I said, they're short on centers, and they want a bona fide top center to play with Gaudreau and Laine. So that deal, to some extent, does make sense. Columbus has some interesting younger players that might intrigue Vancouver, so that's a possibility. And I do think that makes sense. We heard reports from the Islanders Hockey Now website saying that there was some link to the Islanders as well. But now Elliot Friedman's also reporting, and this I think is more of a gut instinct than it is based on sources, but he's suggesting the Washington Capitals are a team that we should watch in this scenario as well. Of course, the Washington Capitals have a ton of injuries this year, and there's also some uncertainty about the future of top centerman Nicholas Backstrom. Of course, he had a pretty significant and serious hip surgery. He's hoping to return, but the odds of players returning from this surgery and continuing their career for very long, unfortunately, have been slim based on what we've seen in other scenarios. So I don't know what the odds are here. I don't want to go out and say Backstrom is done, because I don't think we can say that. It seems to be too early and a little bit premature for that. But it's certainly something that as the season gets a little bit later, the Capitals organization will have a better grasp on if that's a possibility. And if things are not looking good for Backstrom especially, then I think that it makes a ton of sense for a team like Washington to go after a guy like Horvat, who can be a real solid top 2 centerman, give you a real solid offensive output, and at the same time be in the conversation for the Selke Trophy. I do wonder, because there's been some talk, if the Capitals might actually consider moving one of their top young players in Connor McMichael to possibly bring in another player of that nature to kind of keep this thing going. I know that the Capitals were even a team mentioned as well, maybe in the Erik Karlsson sweepstakes, but I think that's a major, unlikely deal we're going to see. Karlsson did not do well in San Jose with Burns there. I don't think it's a coincidence that Burns is gone and suddenly Karlsson's numbers are taken off here through the roof. I think he needs more ice and more of a, the guy kind of status, or they have John Karlsson. I just don't know if that makes sense. Now, Frank Saravalli is also suggesting we might have good trade partners between the Winnipeg Jets and the Toronto Maple Leafs, both involving one of their former high draft picks and top prospects. And that swap would include defenseman Ville Heinola of Winnipeg going to the Leafs in exchange for young forward Nick Robertson. Now, it's fair to say that both of these players have yet to become full-time NHLers. I know Heinola and his agency have complained a bit that they feel he's ready for full-time NHL duty and has not been able to get it. I don't think we believe at this point that they're officially asking for a trade, but it sounds like it would be very well received if indeed they did go down that road. Now, I think there's still a possibility the Jets decide to hang on to him and try to make things work and get more of an opportunity. That would not be too shocking or surprising here as well. But at the same time, the Maple Leafs are certainly in a predicament that they could use some help on the blue line. Now, will they go for a player like Heinola? Are they much more likely to go with somebody with more experience and go for a more veteran presence and somebody who can give them a little bit of grit on the back end? To be completely honest and completely fair here, I don't think they already have a couple young D and Sandin and Liljegren, and so far I think they're, especially in the case of Sandin, I think his development this year has been a little bit of a disappointment for the Maple Leafs. I think they would like to have seen him take a bigger step forward. So far, that hasn't quite been there. I think they'll be patient here. I don't see them trading him by any means, but I do wonder if the season goes on, if he might be able to settle in and get adjusted and start to play better. And of course, that might kind of reduce the urgency of them to go out and get something done by trade. But at the same time, do they want to add another young D like Heinola in the mix here and move on from Robertson, who has real solid potential? I'm not so sure that would be the case. If they're going to trade a player like Robertson or any other top young prospect, I would think they're going to want a solid top forward defenseman who's established and ready and able to jump into their lineup and have an impact on day one. Not somebody who is, still in that maybe probability here because they haven't had a ton of NHL experience. Like, drafted with a lot of potential, but he's yet to realize it with any kind of consistency because he hasn't played enough. It's just that simple. So to me, I think from a Winnipeg perspective, the deal kind of makes sense. They certainly have enough defensemen. Heinel is not getting a lot of playing time, so if they can move him and get a young forward back like Robertson, that might be a real good deal for a team like the Jets. Now, from a Maple Leaf perspective, they certainly don't have a overly deep defensive prospect, bump with some of the guys they have in their system here. So to have a nice young defenseman on the rise probably would be helpful. But at the same time, giving up on Robertson early, I just think might not be the way to go here. I think that they might regret that and learn to kind of bite themselves if they jump the gun and trade Robertson before he gets much of an opportunity. But it's both these players are getting a chance here that, they're not getting consistent playing time, and even when they are, the results aren't there. They're getting maybe not in the best spot in the lineup. And that's what happens when you're a younger player trying to get your feet wet and be established. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but it's an interesting swap of prospects discussion at Sarah Valley Fails makes a good sense. Let me know what you think down in the comments as well. Do you think this is a trade that both these teams should pursue, or do they think they go in other avenues here? Personally, I think other avenues is the option. The Leafs need a more experienced D, and I would suspect that the Jets probably want a more experienced forward, especially with Ehlers being out if they're going to make a move of that kind. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.